Hey friends, it's Seeking Our Spirit, episode 49. Got a good episode for you today. Sat down with a friend of mine, Dr. John Blanch, and had a good conversation. So I hope that you enjoy it. As always, the best way you can support the show is by coming forward and being on the show and sharing your story. All these folks thought they didn't have a story, and as you can see, they do, and you're the same. So come forward, tell your story, share. People really get a lot of benefit out of it. So I hope that you'll do that, or send me names of folks who you think would be good and connect me to them. So yeah, enjoy the episode. I appreciate all the support and love. And if you'd like to be on the show, contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com, or to inquire about spiritual direction. Or if you just cannot stand the thought of being on the show and want to just share a story from your life that we can talk about on the show, call me at 615-933-9737, and you can just leave a message, and we will discuss what you shared on the show. As always, appreciate all the love and the support. Keep hitting those like buttons and share buttons and support buttons and all that good stuff, and sharing the episodes around. Really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoy. All right, take care. Peace. Okay, so we are live. Welcome, John Blanch.
Thank you.
Yeah, good
Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming out. Good to be with you. We've been able to sit down and chat before, but not at this length. So I'm looking forward to diving into your story and your journey, and I appreciate your willingness. So why don't you just, as always, tell people just who you are, what you do, a little bio.
Okay, I'm a retired physician. Did internal medicine in a conventional way for 6 years, inpatient, outpatient. Then started working in college health, providing care for students, faculty, and staff. Started out with that I'm from Philadelphia, lived there 25 years, went to medical school there and college and so on. But moved to central Minnesota, or South Central Pennsylvania for my residency training. That's where I met my wife. And we moved to central Minnesota, very cold place.
Yeah.
And I did college health there for about 13 years. And then I had an offer in Flagstaff, Arizona. We did that for a couple of years. And then Fayetteville, Arkansas for about 7 years.
Uh-huh.
And so I guess 28 years of practicing medicine, and retired early at age 58.
Oh.
And I'm very glad I retired.
Yeah.
It's a good time to retire. And I'm just having a lot of fun.
Good.
Yeah.
What's the fun?
The fun? I like to read a lot. Mm-hmm. My wife reads a lot. We can sit for hours just reading and not conversing. Yeah. But I like to read a lot about psychosocial stuff, spiritual stuff, and
then you have your own spiritual direction practice,
right? Right. Started
and that's been
2020.
Yeah.
Okay. Did chaplaincy. Did some health information technology stuff for a couple of years. It wasn't going anywhere for me, but then had been doing a lot of reading about. Read a book by, I forget his name, but it was Sundays with Maury, and became a hospice volunteer, and then I became a hospice chaplain and a hospital chaplain, so I did healthcare chaplaincy. Okay. Started that in about 2012, so I did that for about 8 years or so.
Yeah.
Then when we moved here, apparently in this area, the hospitals require a MDiv, which I don't have, but I do have the chaplaincy certification as an associate chaplain. Just a strange geographic thing.
Yeah, I don't know that all the hospitals do, but that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's when I got interested in spiritual direction.
Yeah,
knew a couple of people from our church and had conversations with them, and eventually hooked up. Got spiritual direction from one of them. Yeah, and that's been a really good experience.
Yeah, good.
But the chaplaincy training was trying to think of the name of it. CPE.
Oh, yeah. Clinical pastoral education.
It was one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah, that is. And for listeners, that's, at least in the Episcopal Church, all clergy are required to go through that too.
Right. Yeah.
It is. It's intense.
It is intense, yeah. Having been experienced in hospitals, that was not an obstacle for me.
Yeah.
Dealing with hospitals, and I've had a lot of counseling over the years, and so I was really ready to dig into that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's intense from the seminarian perspective because most of us have not had that hospital experience.
Oh,
so
I'm sure.
It's sort of the way to throw folks who feel called to ministry kind of into the deep end because you just
absolutely.
There you are. You've never done any of that, and you're walking into hospital rooms.
Yeah.
You're walking into death. You're taking call and sleeping in the hospital and responding to every code. And it's cool. Well, okay. So, as always, right, and as everyone knows, it's a podcast about spirituality and whatever that word actually means. And so, just like to look at that through the lens of people's stories. So, for John, when you look back on your life and think about what spirituality has looked like, or, when that even became something when you became first aware of that, where do you start?
I was Roman Catholic since I was a little kid. Did that for about 50 years.
Yeah.
Then became Episcopalian, which I've done for about 23 years. Mm-hmm. And it's worked out really well. Mm-hmm. I feel very inspired by my relationship with the Episcopal Church. Mm-hmm. And let's see, where am I going with that?
Well, like just even as a kid in the Catholic Church, like whether in the church or just internally, like what was spirituality for you?
Well, I'll give you an example of a strong spiritual experience that I had when I was about 19. I was in college and I was taking a scripture course. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, sort of out of nowhere, kind of like an epiphany. I finally understood that God is love, and that just knocked my socks off.
Yeah.
It wasn't a theophany, it was an epiphany.
Yeah.
But it was just very memorable. I still remember where I sat as I had that experience. And
isn't that funny how you can be in that context and in that world, you can be dealing with scripture, you can have a prayer life, you can be involved in the church, but it's as if I've been talking about this a lot lately, and I know listeners can't see my hands, but it's almost like there's like a surface level, and then there's something
beyond that,
deeper beyond that.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like a light bulb goes off. I love that example because I could easily do a podcast on love instead of spirituality. Like it's a word we use all the time, but what does that really mean? And we say God is love, but until you have sort of on that experiential level that you're describing, then the light bulb doesn't really go off. Yeah, that's cool. Would you say that was like, did you have an internal relationship with God outside of the church before?
I was, as part of the church, I got Roman Catholic education for 16 years, so it was pretty continuous and had a lot of exposure to church and spirituality.
Yeah.
And our family was strongly religious. And
so it was mainly through the lens of the church.
Through the lens of the church, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, where do you go from there in terms of your kind of experiences? Like, what else would you name? You had that one when you were 19 in college. Did that shift you or change you?
It heightened my awareness. I think I would say that was the case. In college I really enjoyed my theology classes and philosophy classes, mostly the theology classes. And trying to think what we did. But again, at college, I was through college in religious education and so on. There was another situation when I was an orderly, I guess now they call them nursing assistants, when I was about, 20 or 21. And I was dealing with a patient who was really a grumpy guy. He had chronic lung disease and was real grumpy. But we developed a pretty good rapport. And at one point, he lost control of his bowels from the bed to the bathroom. So it was a trail we were dealing with. And he was really embarrassed about it. And I was cleaning him up and stuff. And It just felt like a Good Samaritan moment. That was very memorable. I remember it to this day.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like seeing Christ in another.
Yeah, those moments of like true vulnerability there, like embarrassed, you're gross, and it's like but it's humane. It's it's real. Yeah.
Real positive experience.
Yeah. Well, where does your spiritual journey take you, right? So you go through church, education, growing up kind of culturally, religiously in the Catholic Church. You've got some of these experiences. What else? What's that journey look like?
I've done a lot of spiritual reading. I do a ton of spiritual reading and psychological reading.
Yeah.
So that's where I continued. But when I was busy as a physician for the first 6 years, I didn't have time to do much of anything.
Yeah.
When I got into college health, there was more time because I had an 8-hour day. Didn't have any night call, and so that was wonderful.
Yeah.
I did not tolerate sleep deprivation very well.
Yeah.
So that worked out really well.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. I mean, so it sort of almost feels like in some ways, your relationship with God is coming through intellect in some ways. It's that exploration intellectually.
Yeah. I was an altar server, and that was a powerful experience. Did that till I was about 14 or something, from 11 to 14.
Like serving at the altar.
At the altar, yeah. Got to be a thurifer at one point during a procession, and that was kind of a highlight for me.
Yeah.
Strongly spiritual experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so in terms of your spiritual growth, then are you saying you had some of these moments, but then of course in medical practice and stuff, you just sort of were doing the thing, doing life, doing job,
right?
And then, I mean, later in life, I guess in retirement, is there like another phase of that for you, or?
Well, I've been able to devote a lot of time to reading, and belong to a number of groups. Belong to this group in most of whom are in New Orleans, and we've been reading a number of books. And the most recent one, as I said, was From Aging to Saging, which we really liked. It was really a positive thing. Yeah. But I belong to another men's group that, again, in Arkansas. I live in Tennessee. Yeah. One of the people lives in California, but we all get together on Zoom. Yeah. Zoom has been a wonderful thing.
Yeah, good tool for connection, for sure.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Which we're lacking a lot of these days. People in connection with one another.
Yeah. Doing a lot with church. The vestry was, I'm finishing my last year of vestry. That'll end up in December. I and others started a new ministry, a senior ministry at Ascension called SAAM, Senior Adult Activity Ministry. It took me weeks to learn what that acronym was.
Yeah.
But we've been reading that book. It was our first attempt. But we had a couple weeks ago, we had played a video with Cynthia Bourgeot teaching us about centering prayer.
Yeah.
And that was really good.
Oh, yeah.
And then in another week, we'll have Dr. Greg Phelps, who's a palliative care physician.
I just met with him the other day.
Yeah, he's a real neat guy.
Yeah. And so, like, speaking of like centering prayer, were you exposed to any? Did you have personal prayer practices? Have you had personal prayer practices?
Yeah, I learned about centering prayer when I was in Arkansas. Probably, I don't know, 15 years into it. We were there for 20 years, and or maybe sooner than that. And so centering prayer has been something I've used for. Meditation, I really enjoy meditation when I do it. Belong to a centering prayer group that meets on Thursdays at Ascension.
Yeah.
And
Do you distinguish those two things? Do you distinguish between centering prayer and meditation? And if so, what do you...
meditation, I think, is a more general term.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness meditation through John Kabat-Zinn. I don't know if you're familiar with him. But centering prayer is just, it's you're not doing a mantra, you're not following your breath. You're, just opening up to God.
Yeah.
It's not a thinking thing.
Right, your time sitting with God. I know, I love that practice, and I wish more people knew about it or tried it. I think people, for whatever reason, are so, intimidated by or struggle with sitting in silence.
Oh, absolutely.
And it does take a practice. I mean, it is a discipline, but I feel like, so much of our relationship with this thing we call God, right? This higher power, so much of it is our asking all the time or going to that place with our needs or our desires. And that really, this flips me into a whole spiel, but I just truly think and believe, as I've lived in Scripture kind of for, a good chunk of my life, that paradigm is off. This idea that God is this genie in a bottle and is there to help us or to do things for us. We miss the whole point, which we're fast approaching Pentecost. And to me, the whole point that's being said, Christmas and Easter are the big ones, right? But to me, Pentecost is almost the most important, because it's telling the people that, no, this mission of love, this work of love is your job. And so to me, if you understand it in that way, well, then you start to go, oh, well, maybe I need to be listening to God, right? Maybe I need to ask God for guidance and what does God want of me, and listen. And that's where centering prayer comes in. You're listening, and I think that's vastly important. I guess I'll just take the time to say to people who are listening, if you've never experienced centering prayer, heard of it, look it up. It really is another way to kind of say it would almost be like, not that I would call general meditation anti-Christian or outside of Christianity, but centering prayer in some ways is like, you could call it Christian meditation in a way.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I don't totally like that term either. But yeah, you sit there for 20 minutes, in silence. You got a word that centers you. This is somewhat like transcendental meditation. You have a word that is meaningful to you that as you wander and your thoughts go, which is totally fine. But when you notice that, you go back to your word and you center, and that's it. Yeah. But people are so averse to that.
Yeah. It takes practice. Everybody says, I can't, I have a million thousand thoughts. Cynthia Bourgeot tells a story about Thomas Keating. He was teaching centering prayer, and this very, very obsessive compulsive nun he was working with. And she tried it, and she said, "Oh, I'm just having a terrible time. I've have thoughts 1,000 times." He said, 1,000 opportunities to come back to your sacred word.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really profound. So,
it is profound. And also, I think that on some level, within the world of meditation, there's sort of two schools of thought. One is that, when you sort of like centering prayer, when you notice those thoughts, you try to go back to center. Right. But another whole school of thought is go with those thoughts. Yeah. Right. And there's psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually, there's, I think, power in that, because so much of what we do in the world, we take in so much information, we have so many feelings, we have so much stuff, and we never really give ourselves time to process them. We stuff them down. Right. And so there's a lot of good in and I think if you do process those things, you'll find that centering is easier.
And I think being in that relaxed state, I think your mind is less cluttered, and it gives you a chance to think about things that you wouldn't normally think about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So it's a powerful practice. Actually, not to belabor the point, but I actually just experienced this and had this thought last night or the night before. I was laying in bed, and it's one of the most basic meditation kind of teachings, but doing a body scan,
Right.
and actually relaxing every part of your body. I was, I know that. I was taught that when I was like in middle school. I've been doing stuff, but you forget, you know? And it just struck me so clearly the other night, like, wow, I think I'm relaxed, but not until I actually go through and consciously think about each part of my body and tell it to relax. Does my body actually relax? So we're like walking around, even laying in bed, we're holding tension. We're holding that stuff. Yeah. So I don't know. I think I'm a big believer in super. I think all that's super beneficial. So anyway, just FYI to folks listening.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Cool. Well, sorry, I went on a rabbit trail there. I'm not sure.
I'll just come back to that rabbit trail for a second.
Yeah.
Cynthia Bourgeot has wonderful videos on YouTube on centering prayer.
Okay, cool.
For anybody who is interested.
Yeah, that's good to know. I know Cynthia Bourgeot, and I've read a lot of her stuff, but didn't know that was out there. You mentioned Thomas Keating, who I love as a teacher of a lot of things, but centering prayer being one of the main ones.
Right.
Yeah. So, given that, the sense I get from you, like I already said, and I talk a lot about in these podcasts about the languages God speaks to us with, right? And it seems like almost your language is more through the church and through intellectual endeavor. So if that is true, if that clicks with you, then what have been the kind of transformational gems for you in your learning that were significant to you that you sort of hang on to? I know that's a hard question.
Yeah, it is a hard question.
You mentioned the love one. I mean, that was a good example of what I'm talking about. But are there other just big things in your learning and in your study that you found transformational?
Well, this is not in my reading or anything like that, but just being in the presence of the ocean, the flow of the ocean, the sunsets, that sort of thing are very spiritual for me.
For sure. Nature's another big
we lived in northern Arizona for a while, and we were close to Sedona, and Sedona is a very spiritual place in the desert, and that was a strong experience as well. So but I have a daily prayer time, which I've gotten a habit of, and especially in recent years, I guess, since I started the chaplaincy.
What does that look like?
It's I have having grown up Catholic and Episcopalian, we have our formal prayers,
right?
But and in chaplaincy, I learned how to
extemporaneously
do it extemporaneously. Yeah. So there's an extemporarily. It's a thanksgiving and a request for healing those who are suffering or those who are victims of natural disasters and so on.
You're praying for the needs of the world.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Do you incorporate any silence into your prayer practice?
I am silent when I do it. So
yeah. Cool. Any other sort of areas there that through your studies and stuff that have been significant for you?
I practiced for 28 years as a physician. I think if I had it to do it over again, I probably would have been a psychologist.
Okay.
I think counseling would be a real strong interest for me. And again, the centering or the spiritual direction, is non-directive, evocative, and so on. But it's a form of counseling, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, maybe talk about that a little bit, because I find it was funny. I have a buddy who's starting his own podcast, and I was on there with him for sort of his first kind of pilot episode, and he asked me about about spiritual direction, and I found it, which is not surprising to me. I've had this experience a lot, but I find it something that's difficult to speak to people about, to explain in a concise way.
I agree.
There's not a great elevator pitch.
No,
you know?
I finally, after a couple of years, came up with an elevator pitch. And the elevator pitch goes something like this. Spiritual direction is developing a relationship with a person, supporting them and accompanying them through their spiritual journey, wherever that spiritual journey is taking them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an opportunity for me to hear their sacred stories.
Yeah.
That's
good.
my elevator
That's good.
speech.
It
took a while to come to that.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I usually tell people it's a process of my holding space for that person
Right.
to journey with God.
Right.
Yeah. That has been one of the most impactful experiences of my life. It was spiritual direction, both receiving it and giving it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a joy to sit there. It really is. So, I mean, you named getting to be a part of people's stories and hear their story. But I don't know. It's something so strange that happens because it's so different than any other. It's different than me sitting in my office and doing like pastoral counseling.
Right.
It's
sure.
It's separate from that. It's different than sitting with a psychologist and doing
you're
counseling.
eliciting the wisdom of the person that you're in front of.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a taste of like Lectio Divina in it for me, not in terms of scripture, but in the sense that, you know, the first step of Lectio Divina, when you're listening to scripture, and this is kind of a skill I think you have to develop because you have to learn to trust yourself, but you're looking for or listening for or trying to sense just whatever line or word in that scripture stands out to you. Not what does it mean from an academic Bible study standpoint.
Right.
What's touching your heart in that moment? And you have to trust that. And to me, that reminds me a lot of like when I begin spiritual direction with someone, we're sitting in silence and we're just waiting for them to identify like what's on their heart in that moment. And then you just go there. And it's amazing. I mean, here we are even like talking about it and I still am struggling with my words, like, you know, and then someone brings that forward and then I'm mainly am silent the whole time.
Oh, I agree.
And I'm basically listening. I got to come up with a better term for this. I call them red flags. I don't mean them red flags in the way we normally use them, but I can sort of sense when people are talking, and I'll take mental note of these little flags that pop up, and then I'll ask them. I'll go back and ask them to dig a little deeper in those spots, and that's really all it is. But it's a beautiful and meaningful experience.
Yeah, in chaplaincy, we had a little visual aid. It was a set of dominoes where you hear something and then you follow up on it, and you hear something else and follow up on it, and it really helps the flow.
Yeah, sometimes exactly right, because sometimes it what one is naming in that moment is just the surface. It's that first layer of the onion.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and then you start to peel that back a little more, and it gets deeper. Yeah.
I'm going to tell you one other thing that we've been doing. A small group of us, about 6 to 8, meet every month, and we have what's called a circle of trust, based on Parker Palmer's stuff. The Clearness Committee. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I know Parker Palmer, but
the Clearness Committee, and I've been involved in a couple of Clearness Committees. You have a person who is the focus person, and then you have maybe 5 or 6 people around them, and you ask questions not to clarify in your own mind, but help them to evoke their thoughts about what they're going through. And we have this group, Circle of Trust, and we have we read the rules. We have boundary markers and open, honest questions, and it's no fixing, no advising, no confronting, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful. And then we do a Lectio Divina on a type thing, on a poem, and it takes you from your left brain to your right brain.
Yeah.
For the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah.
The question is, how does that speak to you, and how does that affect your spirituality when you read that?
Yeah.
It's not, analyzing the poem.
Right.
It's just saying how it's touching
what meter
me.
and rhyme of the stanza.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's very similar. I love that point because I often make the point to people, which this might sound completely, almost blasphemous or something to say, but because Lectio Divina is an ancient, spiritual practice,
Sure.
and uses scripture, but I always make the point to tell people you could actually do this with anything. Mm-hmm. It's not, you don't have to use scripture,
Right.
So you're making that point. You can use a poem, you could, it's...
Use a piece of artwork or some music or any number of things you can do it with.
And you made the distinction that sort of moves you into the left brain, which I think is accurate. But
right brain.
Oh yeah,
left
right. Thank
brain,
you.
The right brain. Yeah.
Thank you. But I also think that in some way, when you pay attention to what's touching you in that moment, whether that be scripture or a poem or art or whatever, or in conversation with people, when you move into that side of your brain, I would argue that somehow is, I don't know, attuning us more to the Spirit or the voice of God in our life. Because you see and hear and experience things in a different way. Mm-hmm. I also, I had another point there when you were talking about, that group. So that sounds to me like group spiritual direction.
That's exactly what it's coming down to.
Yeah.
And I think my relationship with the folks that read books together,
mm-hmm.
Folks in New Orleans, that's also group spiritual direction.
Yeah.
Because I've introduced a number of books, and they've really liked them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have some wonderful discussions about them. And I have that interest that you have in the folks who are spiritual but not religious.
Uh-huh.
And in that group, there are a number of people who are spiritual, not religious, but talk about their spirituality and where they're going with it.
Yeah, that's great.
That's cool.
Yeah, well, so I was not familiar with that term from Parker Palmer, but yeah, I have a group of guys that I meet with, and it's exactly what you described. We just call it group spiritual direction. But those things that you named, those ground rules, it's amazing how difficult that is.
Extremely.
We can sit here and just name those things like nothing, but
we want to fix, we want to respond, and
all
that stuff.
And here I've been practicing these things for years and years, and I still, week in and week out, I can feel myself internally wanting to ask a question or give an answer because I want to fix. Because like you said, I want to help, and that's not what we're supposed to be doing.
I was, as a physician, my job was fixing, and then when I came to chaplaincy, I had to turn that off, and it was really hard to turn off.
Yep.
But I think it's a skill that has been a real good life skill for me. That listening and.
What occurs to me with that though is it's kind of ironic, but in our pushing pause on our own desire to fix someone, if we ask those kind of questions that helps them process more and go deeper, we are actually ironically helping to fix.
Indirectly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because really, I mean, it's much like you could use analogies of medicine or addiction or other places in our world where oftentimes we're treating the symptom and not the core problem.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. Our desire to fix someone might just be putting a Band-Aid on it or fixing the outward manifestation of the internal problem. But they have to get to really heal and work on the problem. They have to get down to that level.
They have to solve their own problem. And you're just going to facilitate that.
Yeah. And first even recognize, oftentimes we don't recognize that there is a deeper problem causing those things, right? And so you have to sort of consciously recognize it, name it, before you can even begin to deal with it.
In medical practice, the part I liked best was the psychosocial part. I would ask people what you have these headaches, what's happening in your life right now that or when that started, and you find out about, breakup of family, divorce, loss. It's just amazing. I was always criticized for bonding with my patients rather than cranking out patients quickly.
Oh gosh,
the way it is done today.
Oh gosh, that's scary to me. That people are criticized for actually having a relationship and knowing their
Right.
patients' background and what they're going through. Yeah, man. Yeah. What else you got? What else you think about has been feeding you or significant in your spiritual life?
Well, as part of Ascension, I've been a facilitator for. We meet with the rector on a weekly basis, those who facilitate these things, and then we discuss passages or chapters, and then we then meet with a small group of people on Sunday mornings, and we ask those questions. How does this speak to you in your your current life? Excuse me.
Sure.
So I really like to facilitate groups. One thing I was involved in was back in Arkansas was Becoming Beloved Community, and with racial reconciliation, that sort of thing. And I learned a technique called living room conversations. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Basically, it's a system for having civil conversations about difficult subjects. And the website for Living Room Conversation has like 100 different topics. And there are ground rules, not unlike the Circle of Trust: no fixing, advising, etc., no interruptions. And everybody has a fixed amount of time to speak their piece. But it has worked really well in a number of situations.
Yeah, good.
So I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what, when you look at your own relationship with God, and your experiences of God, what stand out as the most significant to you? Have you had any of those, like what we would call inbreaking of the spirit, or? That love example is a good.
There's an example. When I was a medical resident, my uncle was dying of cancer, and he was the first family member I was really around when they were dying, and I found this kind of contributed to my interest in chaplaincy as well. But it's that being with people who are on the edge of the next life is just such a powerful experience.
Yeah.
I just relish that experience.
Yeah. What can you remember that experience with him, and what about it?
He was going into the next life, going into heaven or the next life, whatever that amounts to.
Yeah.
But it was powerful, really powerful.
Yeah. People are probably sick of hearing me saying that. Yeah. That in the priesthood, for me, hands down the most holy experiences have been in death.
Right.
Which is weird to say. And I don't know what that is. On some level, I wonder if it's almost as simple as kind of the story that you told of the patient that had, lost, control of their bowels. Like, in death, it's just pure vulnerability, transparency. I mean, it's just, I have no good words for that. It's just 100% real. And it's, it takes a lot out of you, and it's sad, and there's parts of it that are hard, but it's so holy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Have you been
such a privilege to be with people?
Yeah.
Most people don't see it this way, but I really enjoyed the emergency room because I dealt with a lot of people who are dying or have deceased, and working with their families has just been really powerful. Just a God experience, I'd call it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Emergency room's a little too wild for me, but yeah. I've had some bad as a priest, I've had some bad experiences in there, but I hear you. It's where these things are happening. Would you name anything else in terms of the most clear times you've experienced God?
I guess I recently said to my wife and to a couple of groups that I belong to, I really love my life at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I also had some health challenges along the way, and having been through working in hospice, I'm not afraid of dying. Mm-hmm. I just dread all the crap that you have to go through before you do it.
Yeah, right.
But I see it as a positive experience, and I feel very privileged in that.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Have you ever had any of the, in the emergency room or in the medical field of people dying and coming back or anything like that, near-death stuff or out of body?
This was a strange situation. I know of fellow chaplains who have had that experience with patients.
Yeah.
We were doing, in my residency, resuscitation in the emergency room on somebody, and we got to the point where we had to call it that they have died. Mm-hmm. And we moved them over to the side, and another person came in almost simultaneously with it in a cardiac arrest, and we were working with them, and it turns out the person that we had put aside started breathing again.
Wow.
We never had a conversation about what that experience was like, but that was a real major moment for me, seeing that happen.
Yeah.
Really miraculous.
Yeah. I can't remember if I've told this story on here before or not, but there was a parishioner that I was going to see, and she, I could tell something was wrong when I was in her room, and she wasn't responding to me or anything. She was breathing. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't feel right. And when I walked out, I almost didn't tell the nurse, but I decided to tell the nurse, I think something's wrong in there. And I didn't think a thing of it. I'd left, mm-hmm. and that person eventually got out, and they were in church, and she came to me crying and gave me this big hug, and she said that she could see me from above. The whole time, that she watched me, and she actually said that she could see me even talk to the nurse. I didn't tell her I talked to the nurse. She said to me, I saw you there with me. I saw and heard you pray. I saw that you were concerned.
Wow.
But she said she saw this from above. And then she said, and I saw you go and stop and talk to the nurse.
Really?
And the nurse came in. Yeah, and she just had too much medicine or a bad combination of the medicine.
Yeah.
And so she was coming to thank me. I mean, I didn't, I didn't know, but so.
Another experience I had was we were dealing with a person who had a bad heart rhythm disturbance and had to periodically besides being medicated, they had to be shocked. Mm-hmm. At one point, he said he was in a room, and again, it may have been the medication speaking, but there was a fluorescent light, a panel of fluorescent light. He said, mm-hmm. I think I see an angel coming down and visiting me. Whoa.
Yeah. Well, I often wonder about that. That's a whole topic I love, just all the out of body and near death and all that stuff. And I've, again, said too many times, there's a whole database you can access that has been collecting people's stories from around the world, different cultures, really? Different religions. And I often wonder if I am in no way, to me, hospice care and hospice nurses and folks that work in that area are saints. I mean, they're such gifts. So I in no way mean to say we shouldn't be doing this, but the current way that we do palliative care and pain management, I am suspicious and wonder if that numbs or deafens some of those experiences that people have naturally when they're dying.
I think not. I think, morphine is a wonderful drug.
Yeah.
It helps people's breathing. It helps calm them. but I don't think it really dulls their experience.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my
Yeah.
my assessment of it.
Yeah. I just wonder. Well, I just know that, I mean, a lot of folks that I've sat with as they're dying, because of the morphine and stuff, they're still alive, but they're not, they're not there. They're not interacting.
It's at those final stages of the dying process, they kind of slide out of awareness and slide back into it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they actually perk up.
Right.
And have a conversation with you.
Right.
Or whatever.
Right.
And then they go back into it. So it's part of the process. I don't think it's the medication that's doing that.
Maybe not.
I
wonder, I think I might have that thought because of Carla, my wife, and a story she has from in Bolivia. Her mom died young, and they didn't. There's not the same palliative care the way we do, and they would. It was as if she was conscious right up until she died, and she would talk to the people that were present. So she would talk to Carla and those that were present, but she would also talk to these other relatives that she could see there.
And I've seen that before as well.
Yeah. You've seen that? Yeah. Man, I don't know. There's so many thoughts on that stuff, but well, I think maybe part of my skeptical brain, maybe it's me saying like I guess I don't like the fact that the palliative care then is a factor, and it makes me skeptical of like, well, are they seeing these things because they're on drugs, or are they seeing these things because it's real? I would like to kind of.
I think it's good to be skeptical and have.
I would like to eliminate that.
Yeah.
But you can't explain away these other stories, sort of like the one I told you of her seeing me down the hall. And there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of stories, millions probably of people giving details of what was happening in the other surgery in the room behind them, or things like that.
Yeah, they're wonderful stories.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, that's right.
What anything else you would name in John's spiritual life that has been significant on an experiential level?
Okay, I'm just looking at your book, The Power of Myth. That had a profound
Joseph
effect
Campbell.
on me.
Yeah.
That the series years ago. And I'm listening to something right now. I'm a podcast junkie. I just love to listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
But they were talking a little bit about Joseph Campbell and the spirituality they talked about, and the commonality among cultures of those spiritual experiences. That was a real big thing for me.
I have not had the chance to dig into Campbell as much as I would like, but Campbell and Carl Jung and that sort of stuff, I really, speaking to your point of that being sort of at the core of the human experience, the stuff that they're talking about, I actually, I don't know if I'm just kind of psychoanalyzing Jesus, but I see the same teachings. I guess to put it another way, I sort of feel like that's what Jesus was getting at.
I think you're right.
I mean, that's death and resurrection,
Right.
all of the shadow work, the going into the cave, the archetypal things. It's, cool.
Yeah, there's a book that I have on Jesus. It's called Jesus and Buddha. It was, one of the editors was, forget his name, progressive Christian. Anyway.
Back, you mean before? Like current day or?
Current day, yeah, current day. Anyway, it's the parallel sayings of Jesus. And then there's the book by Thich Nhat Hanh.
Sure, Living Buddha, Living Christ.
Buddha, Living Christ, yeah.
Yeah, that book impacted me a lot when I was a young person.
Yeah. A little thing about my family, my daughter is married to a guy who's Indian. And we have a grandson who's 9 years old now. But we go to the temple with them. Yeah. And at times, and that's an interesting experience. The ritual and all that. But I think, there are just many names for God, and I think the Indians have multiple names for God.
Yeah, yeah. I often like to say that the Hindu, I don't even know what you would call it, but all the hundreds of thousands of names for the deities is really, people think that's polytheistic, but it's actually, when you understand it better, it's sort of like our concept of the Trinity just on steroids.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
They're different lenses or faces of the one God.
Yeah, and they're various manifestations of facets of God, I think.
Yeah.
That's how I put it together anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and of course I'm influenced by the fact that I was a world religion major and whatnot, but I strongly believe that you can. Well, I experienced it in my own life, just studying these religions. You see, I call it the mystic thread. There's a thread that runs through all of them, that's at the heart of all of them. And interestingly, so there's the mystic thread, the heart of all of these faiths that I sort of think is the same. And then there's also the way that humanity has ruined those.
Oh, absolutely.
And every religion has it. We romanticize other ones because we don't know them, but they deal with the same stuff we deal with in Christianity.
There's a Matthew Fox book that I read, and it was called something like One River, Many Wells, and that addressed that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, anything else you would name or talk about? Anything else you want to?
I think we've kind of covered it.
Good. All
Yeah.
right. Cool,
I've
man.
enjoyed this.
Well, thanks for coming and sitting with me and journeying. It's always a pleasure for me to hear people's stories in their life and how they experience God in their life. So I appreciate you sharing with me.
Glad to do it.
Awesome. We'll catch up again.
Okay.
Thanks.